does it mean to be Australian? What are Australian values and can they be tested? There's talk of a new citizenship test. So we've brought together 5 people from a range of backgrounds to thrash out some questions. And what better place to do it than in a pub, the site of so many great Aussie conversations. Dee Madigan is an advertising executive from Irish stock. She's also a mother of 3. Paul Kapsis is an actor and genre-bending cabaret performer of Maltese Greek heritage. Jacinta Numbajimpa Price, Walpurgee Celtic woman, Alice Springs councillor and keen AFL player. Peter Fitzsimons is a journalist, former rugby player and stay-at-home dad. Tasneem Chopra is an author and an activist of Indian origin who was born in Kenya and raised in Bendigo. We also have a professional boffin, social researcher Mia Korn, who will interpret our discussion. We're having a lock-in and no one's leaving till we agree on some test questions. Well, the aim of today is to come up with 5 questions that will be included in the citizenship test. So what I want to talk about first is values. When we talk about Australian values, we hear these words pop up like larrikinism, egalitarianism, equality, a fair go. So what does it mean then to be Australian, Peter?
I think at absolute core, the Australian value that I enjoy the most is egalitarianism. I love the fact that on Bondi Beach on an average summer's day, you're every chance of finding butcher, baker, candlestick maker, rich man, poor man, beggar man, thief, all lying on towels side by side, don't know each other, but they're all equal under the sun.
Paul, you were nodding quite a lot there. Do you agree that we've got this sort of egalitarian society and that everyone can lie on Bondi Beach and be equal?
To a degree. I mean, I think if you look at it from the outside, it appears that way. But I think once you start to dilute it down to different areas, it's kind of, then you see more differences. I feel like Australia has changed much more into that direction, unfortunately, because, you know, born in Australia, growing up in Australia, I feel like we've lost something. There's something that the generosity and the openness is kind of shrinking now. There's a meanness that's setting in.
Jacinta, you cross cultures, so many different cultures. You're from Alice Springs, you live up there, totally different to a sort of Sydney life that Paul's referring to. Do you get the same sense, you know, that we've got this egalitarian society but maybe there's a bit of narkiness in there?
I think I have to agree with Peter on the egalitarianism. But I also think, I think if you remove yourself from the cities, and come out bush, I think there's still, that exists. You know, I've grown up with a Warrapuri mother and a white Australian father, and in the Northern Territory, I just feel like we get on with each other a lot better, you know. The traditional, the Aboriginal way, my grandparents always just viewed everyone the same.
Tasneem, what do you think Australian values really are?
I think the fact that we're still having this conversation means we haven't got to knowing what it is and defining it. Whether it's just iconic terms like larrikinism and fair go, and she'll be right. I mean, that's a very simplistic analysis.
That is the value that I most enjoy about Australia, is the ideal of classlessness. And it is very fashionable to poo-poo mateship, to say, mateship, this doesn't exist. And yet it does. But it used to be mateship was an exclusively male-to-male thing. But I think as the decades have rolled by, mateship is now far more, I am, you are, we are Australian, we're all equal beneath the Southern Cross, let's get on with it.
I think so. I think we've qualified mateship. Mateship has to be, you're a mate as long as you subscribe to my terms, my conditions.
Exactly.
Whoa. And you fulfil my criteria of what it means to be Australia. You can be Aussie and you can think Aussie as long as it's my brand.
Do you think that brand of Australia has shifted? Is the mateship different, or has qualifiers? As Tasneem?
What we always had here was this sense, this unwritten contract, that if you worked hard and, you know, you're a good person, you'd get ahead. You'd do okay. Even if you weren't rich, you know, you'd have enough to buy your house and raise your family and that. And that has changed. This gap is getting wider and wider and wider, and why am I working hard and getting nowhere? And so these people are often blaming, why is this happening? And it's easy to blame brown people or Muslims or someone else, instead of actually blaming a system that continues and policies that continue to make that divide wider.
You say we've got this anti-authoritarianism and we've got this egalitarianism or against elitism. You say there are exceptions. There is one huge exception, and I mean this seriously, the fact that we are a constitutional monarchy. We all beat our chests and say we're egalitarian, we're all equal. Somehow we've signed up for a system where in the 21st century Australia finds our head of state from one family of English aristocrats living in a palace in London.
So, Nia, given that you look at trends and you listen to what people say and you think, how does this all distill down into something core? What's bubbling to the surface here?
I think the panel is really reflecting what your average Australian says. It reflects their own views, which is, at heart, the core value of Australians is to be egalitarian. But there's two problems that we're facing. One is the public debate and the political debate is very different from what people experience in their own lives. But at heart, what we want to maintain is really nobody's more important than anyone else.
Australia has been using dictation tests to vet potential citizens on and off since 1901. But it was John Howard in 2007 who brought in the new testing regime. Compass hit the streets to find out how many people could pass the current test to see if they could join Team Australia.
So what happened in Australia on the 1st of January 1901? So A, the Australian Constitution was changed by a referendum. B, the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps was formed. Or C, the Australian Constitution came into effect. C.
Ooh, that's a bit hard for me. Okay. I think the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps was formed, was it?
I think it was. The Australian Constitution came into effect.
Oh, should have paid attention in history, Rick.
Each of you brought 2 questions that you would like listed in the test. One of those questions you're going to take and discuss with another person. Peter and Jacinta, you guys are first off. Take your question and you'll go to the back bar and have a chat about it. We'll see you in a few minutes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, here is the question that I would frame. Number 1, do you believe that everyone should be born equal beneath the Southern Cross?
Yes, I do absolutely believe
You
that.
pass. Well,
Great.
no, but don't you think that, I mean, basically what you want is if people have got a culture of a hierarchy of, you know, where you are, where people are born, the primary value of Australia is we may end up in different places or whatever, but, you know, our starting point has got to be we're all equal.
Absolutely. Okay, one of my questions is, why is Vincent Lingiari so significant for Aboriginal people in Australia's history?
If you are a Sri Lankan lady knocking on our door, she would be very unlikely to know the name Vincent Lingiari, surely. Is that an unfair question for her? Because isn't it better to test our values than our straight-out knowledge?
I think what the citizenship test fails at now is enough on the original inhabitants of Australia. If it's a sample test, if there's something along the lines that makes people go, well, let's look a little bit into Australia's history. You know, it could be something as well that I think the rest of Australia need to pick up on as well.
What cultural aspect of your birthplace can you bring to Australia? I.e. language, song, or storytelling?
I like it because it's very positive. You're actually asking me to share an asset of my ethnicity as opposed to test or prove something from me, which is more critical. Kind of bring 2 hats or turbans to the table, and one might be language. I mean, you could even add something like food and cuisine to this conversation. But I think on a more serious and practical, respectful level, I would say religion, even having grown up raised from a Muslim background, I bring that to the table.
Marvellous. I mean, when I thought about the question, I thought about my own family and what I think of Australia. For me, Australia is a successful multicultural country that has many aspects of different people's culture. And I guess I wanted to focus more on cultural rather than politics or religion, because I guess I have my own issues with those things and I wanted to keep them separate.
Is it ever appropriate to discriminate against people who, A, hold different values to you, including religion and sexuality, B, look and sound different to you, or C, none of the above?
Wow. None of the above.
None of the above, that's C, number 3.
So I take none of the above. Never appropriate, I don't think,
Okay,
to discriminate.
yeah.
Because you're discriminating for something you don't, I think, that you don't really understand.
Just because you don't understand something doesn't mean you can hate it, or that you can act in a way that's outwardly mean and vilifying, and that's what I'm trying to get to.
That's right, I agree with that. I think we've kind of gone, in a funny, strange way, we've gone backwards to a time my family described Australia when they first got here, about that they weren't accepted.
I think we've reimagined the White Australia policy by conflating national security and citizenship as one issue, when they're very separate issues.
Do you joke about yourself or like it when other people joke about you?
When I joke about myself, it's funny. When others do, not so funny. Self-deprecation only requires yourself, not somebody else.
Okay, I guess the reason I wanted to get away from values is I think someone's character is far more important as to whether they'll fit into Australia. And I think the ability to laugh at yourself is really, really important.
It's not taking yourself too seriously, in other words. What worries me is what happens to the emotionally vulnerable, fragile people who may be coming here.
Yeah, no, that is true, and I think you wouldn't certainly have it perhaps on refugee testing and things like that.
All right, my question to you is, which of the following best describes attitudes to women in Australian society? A, in Australian society, women are given all the same opportunities that men have. B, men and women are different and have different roles to play, and men are better at decision making. Or C, women can be too emotional and therefore must rely on men for leadership. Tough?
It is. I mean, obviously the answer is A, but I was actually playing with that kind of thing as well, because I think when you make it too obvious, they'll know what the answer. So it's probably a good way of identifying people who've got sexist attitudes, I guess.
Welcome back, everyone. Very shortly we will be actually voting on your questions. I'll be interested to see whether your opinions have maybe changed over the course of the morning. You know, we're talking about values, and maybe this needs to be not around knowledge but around character.
It is very interesting. I think there is a very Australian thing. If you tell a story about yourself, you bloody well better end up as the butt of the story, and it better be self-deprecating.
Yes.
And then otherwise, if it's not Australian.
Talk about being self-deprecating. Is it ever appropriate to ridicule others and make them the butt end of your joke? Because I think when we slide into that territory, if there are no boundaries, then you're kind of opening it up for open slather.
I think if you differentiate it by talking about yourself, it's okay to joke about yourself, but it would be interesting then to have that follow-up question about at what point does something stop becoming a joke, I guess.
That's interesting, because traditional Aboriginal way, teasing is a huge part of culture, and you've got to be able to take it, and You know, I think humour. You know, humour is humour, and I think we know where we draw the line and not overstep that sort of boundary.
You can also tell stories where Australia is the butt of the joke. If I may say, the one I like, it's not a joke, it's a true story, is two immigrants from Pakistan, and as they get off the plane, they say, let's meet in 5 years from now and see which one of us is more Australian than the other. And they meet in 5 years, and one of them says, I drink VB, I go to the Aussie rules, and I have meat pies with tomato sauce. And the other one says, off, towelhead. and he won.
But I think when you talk about people from war-torn countries, I don't think humour's the first thing to go. I think you'll find that people who have come across adversity in life and they've faced those challenges, that is the one thing as human beings we hold on to the most. Right. And you'll find people who have faced such challenges have often got the greatest sense of humour.
Right.
I think what we're looking here is intent. And the intent is you can laugh at people, but the idea in Australia is you're laughing at people, but there's no nastiness behind it. And that's what we're trying to capture here, that you can laugh at yourself, other people can laugh at you, as long as the intent is good.
How do we craft a question to capture those aspects of character when everyone does come from such a different background, such different histories?
I wish there was a simple answer to that, but it seemed from the discussion that these are open-ended questions. You can't establish somebody's character or the values that they hold with a yes-no multiple-choice question.
But I can't help but think that that central Australian ideal of what it means to be Aussie is different now to what it was 50 years ago. I mean, if 1 in 3 of us were born overseas or have a parent born overseas, and if you're from Melbourne, it's 1 in 2. The face of Australia looks very different.
My parents never took out Australian citizenship because until '94, you had to swear allegiance to the Queen. And Jesus, Mary, you're something swearing allegiance to the Queen.
It's like a jury, exactly.
Freedom of speech is one of the aspects the Australian government says is a value we all uphold as Australians. Paul, I might go to you first. Freedom of speech, do you think that's something that we do well in Australia?
I feel that it's important to have it. I definitely feel that. I feel that if someone is able to express themselves, whether it's something I don't agree with or not, I think they should be able to say it. But then what I love about freedom of speech is I can respond with my freedom of speech.
But I think freedom of speech doesn't mean anything goes, and I think where there's cases where, you know, we know that words actually don't have no effect on people. That's just simply not true. That there are cases where continual use of words can actually
denigrate,
more than denigrate, but can actually really harm people. And I think and that's where it becomes too high. And it used to be there was a line that we knew not to cross, and it's almost like that's sort of gone now.
Freedom of speech comes with freedom of responsibility. Yeah, totally. It means when the words that you use are there to express your views, that's fine unless and until you reach a point where your words and your actions denigrate and vilify another person to the extent that their integrity, well-being or physical safety is suddenly threatened.
Yeah. We should be able to sit down together and have a civilised debate with one another, you know, without it getting to those points, and being able to raise really tricky, sticky questions that people don't want to talk about.
Because I grew up with that. I grew up most of my school life with verbal abuse and being called names every single day. I lived with that abuse my whole life. It could have gone to the point where at one stage I wanted to end my life because my presence was making people angry. And
I think when vilification ends up affecting the well-being and psychologically starts damaging and hurting people, we fail.
Some of the sample questions from the Turnbull government do focus on women and children. One of the sample questions is, can you strike your spouse in the privacy of your own home? Under what circumstances is it appropriate to prohibit girls from education? So these are clearly questions that
they're rubbish questions, though. No one, even someone who's an absolute domestic abuser, that first question, the red flags are up. They know exactly what's being asked.
But is that like a trick question, sort of like a setup?
I think it's relevant. I think domestic violence is a huge issue.
But I think the question needs to be much more subtle than that because they're going to know
in a way
that
to
is.
kind of weed that out as opposed to...
The reality is before you even get to the stage where you can apply for a citizenship test, you've been vetted as a refugee, for example, or you have pass the police check in the country of origin before you arrived in Australia. So that to a certain extent, if there is a criminality in your background, you wouldn't be here, all right, to start with.
Perhaps the only way really around it is to have a question that's so open-ended and says, what are your views on the role of women in society and in the home?
That's a better question.
Let's hear what you
I like that
say.
question.
Yeah. That's right. And then let's hear the complexity of your answer and see how does
Although,
that fit.
if English is not your first language, you might struggle.
You can have a translator, can't you? Or Google Translate.
I mean, I think if you're going to be offended by a question that asks you whether you believe violence is acceptable, then you're not the right type of person to come into our country.
No, I think it's an obvious question with an obvious answer, which everyone's going to skirt around. It's not going to actually measure anything.
We need to test attitudes rather than actions.
But it'd be like a question like, what do you think of homosexuals?
The point of the exercise, I believe, is to win an election, is to put out, we're putting out values, you know, we're the gatekeepers, but give Australians some values, they may embrace them. Give them a set of rules, they'll say get nicked.
What happens to those values, though, if they change over time?
Same-sex marriage, up until 5 years ago, nobody discussed it, and if they did discuss it, it was against it. Well, now, in the space of 5 years, we're batting 76% say, for God's sake, can we get this done?
Get it done.
Yeah, but that's how quickly, that's moved at warp speed.
Times are changing, you know, our values have changed. So, you know, I think, I guess, for me, I think it's relevant for a change of questions to reflect that we're always evolving.
But it seems from the discussion that the point of the value is for us to emphasise and reiterate to people who want to become new Australians, these are our values.
And that's how you judge, ultimately, is by people's actions, is really the only way we're ever going to tell. So you have a P-plater. You're a P-plater Aussie.
Or a C-plater, citizenship plate.
Yeah, or something, yeah. And you sign on to that knowing that it's a contract in a way. You are taking out a contract with this country to uphold these values, and if you break those...
Which, in a way, comes with visa conditions anyway.
Yes, rather than at the moment you have to wait the 4 years, don't you, before you sit the citizenship. Maybe you still have a period afterwards of 4 years or something. But during that time you still have to be able to access Medicare. You know, you can't make people sort of suffer.
Doesn't that get too close to 2 tiers of citizenship?
I don't think it is unfair for there to be a probationary period of citizenship.
We've already gone from 1 year of waiting for citizenship to 4 years, and that was very bloody-minded. And I think to add another 4 years is just insult to injury.
Is it bloody-minded to say we want to be careful on this? Is that really bloody-minded?
We still have the checks and balances.
But if we have the 4 years afterwards, would you be all right?
I don't know. I think 4 years is a long time.
And we don't want to give you citizenship lightly. We want to see a commitment from you that you're here for keeps. And the second question that Jacinta and I didn't get to discuss, but the second question I put out is, do you wish to make a contribution to the Australian community to make our nation stronger?
I guess what the test does at the moment is all about identifying whether you fit into the status quo. Whereas if you're asking about what you're going to contribute in the future, it's actually admitting that we are evolving, and do we want to make the country better rather than just the same?
Yes, exactly.
But you also mentioned economy. You also said that it's not an economic... What money can you bring into this country? We sort of have this...
We're on a default position of looking at the economic contributions that migrants can make as if defining that with their only contribution, whereas, you know, there's such a rich wealth and there's a vastness to our capacities, you know, whether it's our linguistic skills or our art, which is a huge area which hasn't even been tapped, not to mention sport and other areas.
Can we very delicately, foot by foot, just go back out into the minefield one more time? Is it fair to say that one of Australia's values is we are a secular society? We have had in our history seriously religious people, but by and large, I think our attendance at religious institutions, I think it's down to 13 or 14%. But then somebody says, I'm a heavyweight religious person, you know,
Well, that gets recorded. That gets recorded. So you actually open it up to let people say, what can I bring that defines who I am?
Now it's time to vote. Thank you so much for your participation today. So you have your Team Australia text lines on your mobiles.
Yep.
And Mia's going to take your anonymous votes.
Okay, I'm done.
Each panellist has brought 2 questions with them today and will be voting for their favourite.
Actually, I've changed my mind.
And here are the top 6 questions. Is it ever appropriate to discriminate against people who hold different values to you, including religions and sexuality, look and sound different to you? None of the above. Should equality and protection under Australian law apply to those born in Australia, all citizens irrespective of place of birth and language proficiency, those with fluent and functional English? Do you want to make a contribution to the community that will make this country stronger? Do you believe everyone is born equal under the Southern Cross? Why is Vincent Lingiari so significant for Aboriginal people in Australia's history? Do you joke about yourself or like it when people joke about you? It's been such a great day. Thank you so much all for locking in with us today. Thank you, Jacinta, Peter, Tasmin, Dee, Paul. It's been great. And our boffin here on a separate table with your dictionaries. Thank you so much, Mia. It's been
A little bit of leap being on your own table, but anyway.
Yes.
Join me and our boffin, Mia Corn, for a live Q&A Monday at 12:30 p.m. on the Compass Facebook page. Next time on Compass.
I think my dad probably thought it's a bit of a stage. He'll grow out of it.
Ike's the sort of person who takes everything to the nth degree. He doesn't do anything by halves.
Ike was probably the only person who wasn't Jewish at King David.
People joke to me and they'll say, you know, it's not too late to back out.
We shouldn't really convert somebody who's not really fully committed.
I, Ike Curtis, declare that I wish to be accepted into the Jewish faith.
Ike's conversion. Next time on Compass.